Another build today. So this is a bit of a different configuration than the last one in some way. I'm still using the same Core i9-9900K CPU, same motherboard. However, the CPU fan is a little bit smaller. So this is NH-U14S model. That is a little bit smaller than the previous one. Hopefully this will make this build a little bit easier. Also, the power supply is not 1000 watt, it's just a 600 watt SFX, smaller type of a power supply. And instead of a 2080 RTX, I'm using GTX 1080 Ti. And my favorite part of this build is going to be the case. I've built a bunch of systems with this particular case, and I really like it. It's if you can stick with a 2-slot GPU, I would highly I can't recommend this case enough. I would really recommend that you look into it because it's quiet. It can take pretty much any GPU. However, it just has to be a 2-slot GPU, and it has plenty of airflow. So I guess I learned my lesson last time with this type of CPU fan, and at this point I'm not going to actually install it because it might get in the way of plugging in cables, so this is gonna have to wait until the final assembly. The great thing about this Node 304 case is that it takes a regular power supply, or it can also take a SFX, a form factor power supply, and in this case I'm going to be using the latter. Now, in order for you to be able to mount this, I mean, I know that some people just use these two holes to mount, but I don't really like, I'm not really thrilled about the idea that the power supply is only going to be held by 2 screws. So I have this bracket that allows me to turn SFX power supply into like a full form factor power supply. So I'm going to be using this to make this compatible with this opening over here. These brackets, you can buy them from like Amazon, or like there's plenty of websites that you can buy this from. It's usually really cheap, costs a couple bucks. Also, some power supplies, some SFX power supplies come with such a bracket. So it shouldn't be an issue for you to get one. Or if you don't feel like it, you can just mount this power supply without any brackets. Okay, so the next part, I'll connect all the cables, and only after that I'm gonna install the CPU fan, because I remember my last assembly, and once you install this fan, it's gonna be very hard for you to plug in anything. So we plug in cables first, and then only then the fan goes in. Okay, the cool thing about this case is that it has this switch over here that pretty much allows you to switch between high, medium, and low fan speed. So it comes pre-installed with that switch, and also this exhaust fan and these two intake fans, which is great. And so you need to plug in a just power in here, and you have 3 fan headers over here. So one is already plugged in, and this fan is already plugged into one of them, and now I have 2 available headers. I'll just plug those 2 in and I'll be all set. So again, the great thing about this case, you don't need extra fans for this, because it already comes with everything you might need for efficient air cooling. That was by like a lot easier fan mounting than my last assembly, because during my last assembly I was messing with this with the CPU fan for good 15 minutes. In this case, it only took me literally 30 seconds to mount everything. And part of the reason why this is so simple in this case is because in this case, if you want to still want to have some access to your cables, all you need to do is just rotate this case, flip it like this, and everything is accessible, like your CPU fan header. Whereas on the last case that I was using, like here there was like a wall. You couldn't access this side at all. And the last thing for us to do is to just mount this 1080. This case will comfortably fit 2-slot GPU. It will not fit a 2.7 or 3-slot GPU. So this is, but you can, yeah, if your GPU is 2-slot, you're good to go. Now, one thing that I can point out here is that if you ever put a regular form factor power supply in this case, be mindful that you may not be able to do so because all of these cables might interfere with your GPU. So that is the reason why actually I chose this specific power supply and not a full-size power supply, because if you're a full-size power supply is actually full size and not like shorter than regular, that you will not be able to mount a full size graphics card. But SFX power supplies are available pretty much everywhere these days, so I would just recommend that you stick with SFX, and then you have unlimited, pretty much unlimited amount of space here for cable management and for your GPU as well. And quite literally the last thing for me to do is to plug in to these front CPU fans, and we are done. So this is it, guys. My last build, my previous build, took me about 3 hours to complete. This build took me about 25-ish minutes. So this is just to give you a perspective. This case is super easy to work with. It's very forgiving, and if you ever consider building a Mini-ITX system, this is literally, like, I've never been able to find a case that would be better than this for a Mini-ITX build, so strongly recommended. And I'll go power this puppy up and see how everything goes. And another thing that I wanted to point out in this case, there is this cutout on the side, which is absolutely fantastic for your graphics card air intake. Because in pretty much every other case, either with glass panel or completely murdered out case, you would not have an efficient airflow for your GPU. Now in this case, your GPU has access to the outside air, so you don't have to worry about anything else but your CPU cooling, which in this case is fantastic.